Yeah, I know. You saw the thumbnail, you read the title, and your first reaction was probably something like, who is this guy and what is he talking about? Maybe you're already typing in the comments. Maybe you're about to close the tab. Don't. Not yet. Because here's the thing. I've been watching TV seriously for years, over 130 shows, dramas, thrillers, comedies, miniseries, prestige TV, trash TV, everything in between. I've sat through finales that destroyed me. I've watched pilots that grabbed me by the throat and never let go. I've seen shows that changed the way I think about storytelling. And through all of that, through all 130 plus shows, one title kept coming up over and over again in every conversation, in every best TV ever list, in every debate about prestige television. Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad is perfect. Breaking Bad is the greatest show ever made. If you don't love Breaking Bad, you don't understand television. I've heard all of it. And for a long time, I went along with it. Honest and slightly ashamed, because when everyone around you is saying the same thing with that much confidence, it's easy to think, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I need to rewatch it. Maybe they're right. Quietly conflicted. But here's what I've figured out after years of watching and rewatching and thinking about this stuff. They're not right. Breaking Bad is a good show, but it is not the greatest show ever made. It is not even close. And the gap between what Breaking Bad actually is and what the internet has decided it is, that gap has a name. Overrated. Today, I'm going to prove it. With specific scenes, specific characters, specific comparisons. Not because I want to start arguments, but because this conversation is long overdue. Let's go.
Before anything else, let me be clear about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I am not saying Breaking Bad is a bad show. If I said that, you'd be right to close the tab. Breaking Bad is well crafted. It has great performances. It has iconic moments. Some of its individual episodes are genuinely brilliant pieces of television. What I am saying is this. The reputation Breaking Bad has built, the undisputed greatest of all time status, is not earned. It is inflated. And that inflation has real consequences for how we talk about television. Overrated doesn't mean bad. Overrated means the hype exceeds the reality. And Breaking Bad's hype, it has completely swallowed the reality. Here's a simple test. Ask anyone who calls Breaking Bad the greatest show ever made to explain why. Really push them. 9 times out of 10, you'll get 3 things. Walter White's transformation, the finale, and the word tension. That's it. That's the whole argument. And here's my problem. Those 3 things, they're real. They exist. But they're not enough to justify greatest show in television history. Not when you put Breaking Bad next to what else has been made. Not when you actually interrogate those claims instead of just repeating them. So let's interrogate them, one by one.
Let's start with Skyler White. If you've spent any time in Breaking Bad fan spaces, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Skyler White is one of the most hated characters in television history. Not disliked, hated. The actress, Anna Gunn, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times because the hatred had spilled into her real life. She was receiving threats. People weren't just angry at a fictional character, they were directing genuine hostility toward the woman playing her. Now, ask yourself a question. Why? The standard fan answer is because Skyler was annoying, she was always in the way, she was holding Walter back. But here's the thing. That answer perfectly describes the problem I'm pointing at. Skyler White was written to be in the way. She was written to be the obstacle between Walter and his goals, and by extension, between the audience and the vicarious thrill of watching Walter win. The show needed you to be slightly irritated by her so that you'd root for Walter even as he became a monster.
That is a deliberate writing choice. And on one level, it worked. The manipulation worked. But here's my question. Is that good writing? Because truly great character writing doesn't use its female characters as emotional speed bumps. It doesn't construct a woman specifically to be disliked so that a man seems more sympathetic by comparison. Think about Carmela Soprano in The Sopranos. She exists in the exact same structural position, the wife of a criminal, aware of what her husband is, complicit in her own way, and deeply compromised morally. But nobody hated Carmela Soprano the way people hated Skyler White. Why? Because the writing respected her as a full human being with her own interior life, her own contradictions, her own story. The Skyler problem is not evidence of a bad character. It's evidence of a writing room that was so focused on Walter's journey that everything else became a tool in service of that journey. And when a show's most significant female character is primarily a tool, that is a limitation, a real one. One that the greatest show ever made label conveniently ignores.
This is the argument that's going to get the most pushback, and I understand why. But I think it's the most important one. Breaking Bad is slow. Not slow in the Chernobyl sense, where every scene carries weight and the deliberate pace makes you feel the heaviness of what you're watching. Slow in the structural sense. Repetitive. Cyclical in ways that stop feeling intentional after a while. Here's the basic Breaking Bad plot loop, which you will recognize if you've watched the show. Walter has a plan. Something goes wrong. Walter improvises. Walter survives. The stakes get slightly higher. Repeat. This loop runs for 5 seasons. And the loop itself isn't the problem. Lots of great shows have structural repetition. The problem is what the show does inside the loop. Because by season 4, you've seen this cycle enough times that the tension stops working the way it did in season 1. You stop asking, will Walter survive? And start asking, how will Walter survive this time? That's a fundamentally different question, and it produces fundamentally different viewing experience. Now compare that to Chernobyl. 5 episodes, just 5. And in those 5 episodes, every single scene carries a weight that Breaking Bad's best individual episodes can barely match. Why? Because Chernobyl wasn't trying to fill 5 seasons. It had exactly as much story as it needed to tell, and it told that story and stopped. Or compare it to The Leftovers. 3 seasons, each one completely reinventing itself, each one more emotionally devastating than the last. Season 1 is a grief drama. Season 2 is almost a mystery. Season 3 is something close to spiritual. The show kept evolving because the writers kept asking what they hadn't said yet. Breaking Bad kept going because the audience wanted more. Because the network wanted more. Because the money was there. That's not a creative decision. That's a commercial one. And I'm not saying commercial decisions automatically ruin a show, but I am saying that when we talk about the greatest show ever made, we should probably factor in whether the show's length was driven by artistic necessity or market demand. Because for Breaking Bad, that answer is pretty clear. All right, I know exactly what you're thinking right now. Let me go through the main counterarguments. The finale was perfect. Okay, yes, Felina is a satisfying finale. I'll give you that. But here's the context you need to hold on to. Breaking Bad's finale aired after Game of Thrones had completely destroyed audience trust in TV endings. After Lost. After Dexter's original run ended the way it did. The bar for good TV finale had been so thoroughly demolished that any show which ended in a coherent, internally consistent way was immediately declared a masterpiece. Felina is a good finale. It wraps things up. It gives Walter a version of dignity while still punishing him. Fine. But the greatest finale in television history? Watch the final episode of 6 Feet Under. Watch the final season of The Leftovers. Then come back and tell me Felina belongs in that conversation. It has a 9.5 on IMDb. Clearly, people love it. Yes, and Friends has 8.9, and The Big Bang Theory ran for 12 seasons and was watched by hundreds of millions of people. Popularity is not quality. These are different things. If popularity equaled quality, this would be a very short conversation. Also, and this is worth understanding, IMDb ratings for prestige shows are structurally inflated. The people who rate a show on IMDb are overwhelmingly the people who liked the show enough to seek it out and rate it. The casual viewer who found it okay and moved on doesn't log in and leave a 7. The structural result is that beloved shows get pushed toward 9 and above, regardless of their actual artistic merit. A 9.5 tells you that Breaking Bad has a very passionate fan base. It does not tell you that Breaking Bad is the greatest show ever made. You're just saying this for attention. I understand why this is your first instinct. Contrarianism gets views. Hot takes get clicks. I know that. But look at what I actually did in this video. I made specific arguments. I compared specific shows. I pointed at specific structural problems with specific scenes and characters. I didn't just say Breaking Bad bad and walk away. I built a case. If your response to that case is you're doing it for attention, that's not a counterargument. That's a way of avoiding the argument. So if you actually disagree, and I hope you do, tell me where I'm wrong. Specifically, in the comments. I'll read them. I'll respond to the best ones in the next video. That's a promise.
So here's where I want to land. This video isn't really about Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad is the example, the symptom, the most visible case of a much bigger problem in how we talk about television. We've built a canon, a fixed list of greatest shows ever that almost never gets questioned. Breaking Bad at the top, The Sopranos right behind it, a few others in the mix. And once a show gets onto that list, once the consensus forms, it becomes almost impossible to push back without sounding like you're doing it for shock value. But here's what that canon costs us. It costs us honest conversations about shows that deserve them. Shows like Banshee, one of the most viscerally committed pieces of genre television ever made that almost nobody talks about anymore. Shows like The Leftovers, which I would argue is the most emotionally intelligent drama of the last 20 years that gets mentioned in hushed tones by the people who watched it, and almost nowhere else. Shows like Slow Horses, which is doing right now what people claim Breaking Bad did, building genuine tension through genuine character work, and getting a fraction of the cultural conversation. These shows don't have a 9.5 on IMDb. They don't have Reddit threads with 100,000 upvotes. They don't get referenced in every greatest TV list. And part of the reason for that is that Breaking Bad and the mythology we've built around it has consumed so much of the available oxygen in this conversation that there's barely any left for everything else. That's what this channel is here for. I'm not here to tell you what to love. I'm not here to take things away from you. If Breaking Bad genuinely moved you, if it changed how you see storytelling, that's real, and I'm not dismissing it. But I am here to push back on the idea that any single show deserves to be placed so far above everything else that criticizing it becomes a personality flaw. Television is too rich, too varied, too full of genuinely extraordinary work, most of it underseen, most of it undervalued, for us to keep having the same conversation about the same 5 shows. So if you're watching this, and especially if you made it to the end despite disagreeing with me, you're probably the kind of person this channel is for. Subscribe if you want more of this. Like the video if you think this conversation is worth having, even if you think I'm completely wrong. And leave a comment, a real one with a real argument, because I will read it, and the best response gets featured in the next video. I'll see you there.